Hey everybody.
Fatbirdfinds here.
I'm Mary Beth.
And I'm Laura.
And I'm Nikki.
Welcome to another Tales from the Put-Out Closet.
We're here. We're back for episode number 4. It's so exciting.
It's the Madmen podcast, and this is episode 4, and it is New Amsterdam.
Quickly becoming a very one of our favorite things to do.
Oh my gosh, we're enjoying this so much. Hopefully you're enjoying it too. If you are, make sure you give us a follow out there in podcast land, or you can come over to YouTube and watch along with us. We do show still images from the show up on the screen. We don't show any video clips or anything like that, so you're not really missing anything. But if you do want some visuals to go along with what we're talking about, we do show those on the screen on YouTube. We would love for you to come over, subscribe, like, comment, and all the good stuff. All right, shall we get started?
Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, so this episode is really sort of 2 storylines, maybe 3. So there's a very distinct storyline going on with Pete. I think that the episode is really all about Pete, but we also have a secondary storyline about Betty. Mm-hmm. And then Dawn's storyline is sort of intermingled between the two.
You can't have much of a story without Dawn.
So I think what we'll do, Laura, is we'll do ladies first, and I think I'll let you take it away with Betty's storyline throughout the show, and then we'll finish out with Pete's.
Okay, yeah, that's a little different than we've done before.
Yeah,
so
normally we go scene by scene, but this time let's take it into storylines.
we can do that.
All right, take it away.
Oh, okay. Just right off the bat here.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, so I think the first thing I wanted to say about it was kind of throughout the show. One of the themes that runs through the show is like looking behind the exterior of what something seems. Okay. So with Betty, that's what we're doing. We're getting kind of more meat about Betty, about her personality and her maturity level and what's on her mind these days. Okay. So it starts with the bedtime scene, and here is Miss Betty being the perfect mom, reading to the kids. The kids are about to fall asleep. Looks like Sound of Music or something. And she's reading from a nursery book, like a fairy tale book. I think the name we looked up was Nursery Friends from France.
Okay.
And she says, church bells rang out and the air was filled with flying birds. What a joyous parade it was back at the palace. No king could command anything finer.
So I think it's an interesting topic to point out that we tried to look up that nursery rhyme or that fairy tale, and to my knowledge, it doesn't exist. So I even found an article written on the internet which said that the writer who wrote the article said that they read through the book, flipped through all the pages, and never found that in that book at all.
I think that's funny. Either they just wrote something that sounded good, or there's like some really deep meaning to what they wrote, and I can't really make out the deep meaning part.
I think that there is a deeper meaning, honestly. Let's not forget that the word birds is in there. And her nickname from Dawn is Birdie. That could mean something. I'm not sure.
It could be.
I'm not sure.
It's interesting though. It's one of those fun things to just kind of think about.
Yeah.
But for sure, the imagery is on purpose because Betty herself is like a fairy princess. She lives in kind of a fairy princess world in her mind, and she looks like a fairy princess.
Yeah.
And like we said before, I think in casting, it is well known that she was cast for her looks alone. She didn't really have any lines at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
He wrote her lines in later. But she tried out for Peggy and for Betty. But, I mean, she looked just like...
I didn't know she tried out for Peggy.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But she, was cast because she looked like Grace Kelly. She looked like a princess.
Yeah. I can't imagine her as
Wouldn't
Peggy.
that be funny?
That's crazy.
I know, right? Okay. So anyway, so it just sets up the scene. She's like, you guys go to sleep. Your dad will, you'll see Dad in the morning or whatever. Because, of course, Dawn's not home yet. It's bedtime. And, of course, Dawn's nowhere to be found. And then she decides that she has to go walk the dog. This damn dog that Dawn has drug home at the end of the last episode.
That he stole from some neighbor's yard.
No telling where from. Her name's Polly. Sally's named her Polly. But anyway, here goes Betty doing her little due diligence. Probably she looks like she's okay, but probably cursing under her breath that she's got to take care of this dog.
That dog though is like pulling her along. Like she skips at one point to try to keep up with it.
It's a big dog.
Yeah.
It's a big dog. So she is, and then she stumbles upon a scene with the neighbors across the street. Mm-hmm. If you'll remember, Helen is the divorcee that lives across the street. We met her previous episodes, and the girls kind of talk about her behind her back and stuff. And so now she's stumbled upon the ex-husband trying to get in the house.
Yeah.
And it's quite a scene. And it's, she's very, she's clutching her pearls about this scene that's happening out in her front yard.
Well, he's trying to get into Helen's house to see his kids.
Exactly. Let's see. So, so of course, Betty, I was kind of surprised she's not having any part of it. He turns around. Helen won't answer the door. He turns around and pleads his case to Betty and says, "Just let me come use the phone." Of course, no cell phones. And she's like, "Oh no, I'm sorry. I no strange men in my house. Thank you very much."
Right.
I think it's funny that they walk around and leave the kids in the house. I would never dream of doing that. The kids are asleep up there. Yeah. So anyway, she's like, nope, we're not having any of that. So
and he's flabbergasted. He's like, why wouldn't you let me in your house to use your phone? He's like, can't get over it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Betty goes back home, and she has gotten into her loungewear for the evening. This is something that we always make fun of. You're like, oh, look what Betty's wearing. It's her peignoir set.
Oh, her peignoir.
I can't believe she answers the door like this. But the door, somebody comes to the door and it's Helen. So she goes down and lets Helen in and asks her to come on in because Helen wants to apologize for what's happened. And so, I don't know, they're kind of awkward with each other, but Betty warms her up to her pretty quickly because she is apologizing for what's happened.
I think it's funny. One of the first things that Helen says when she comes in the door is, "I'm so sorry. I just wanted to come apologize." And Betty politely is like, "I don't know what you're talking about."
Oh, yeah.
And then Helen's like, "Yeah, you do."
Yeah. She goes, I was watching from the window the whole time. I saw you out there.
Yeah. So Betty's trying to be the polite, person. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Polite and avoidant, right? They just don't want to talk about things.
Right.
But then she has to. Let's see. What was I going to say about that? Okay. So they, of course, they're smoking, they're drinking, and they're bonding over the smokes and the drinks and all that kind of stuff. And Helen starts to kind of open up about what's happened. I guess she feels she owes Betty an explanation. Betty's not really prying. I mean, she's not really, dug in to try to figure out what was happening. But at one point she's like, she does say, well, what happened, meaning originally what happened immediately during the episode. But Helen goes back and says, well, he was an insurance agent and he was never at home, and, he was in Manhattan all the time working, and really he was with all these other women, which I thought was,
right.
Of course, we're supposed to immediately know that, she's going to think that about Dawn.
Right.
So they're talking about the shoes. Oh, I didn't mean to, and I don't think Betty wants to hear it. I don't know what you guys think. I don't think Betty really wants to hear that because I don't think she wants to really come face to face with it just yet.
Well, I think she's still a little bit naive here. I think she thinks that that's Helen's problem, and she doesn't really want to deal with Helen's problem.
I think so, but I think that she also, she has all her suspicions about Dawn, and she doesn't want them added to by Helen.
Maybe so.
Yeah. Betty's not dumb.
She's not dumb, but I think she's naive.
Well, it sounds just exactly like Betty's life right now. Everything that Helen's saying is something that Betty would say to describe Dawn.
Yes.
Dawn works in Manhattan. He works a lot, and he's always entertaining clients.
So, it's the brilliance of the show. They do this quite a bit, that they don't just come out and tell you something. They hint at it in other ways,
Very true.
Like through other conversations. Okay, so Don comes home. He has barely anything to do here. He comes home and he's kind of freaked out for a second because Helen's sitting in there smoking and drinking and talking away in there. He's like, hello? And so, so Helen kind of looks at him. I don't know what kind of a look it is. It's kind of like I remember you from last week kind of look, I think we had a moment last week. I don't know. And I'll let you chime in, but I was going to just say, I read something that said that they silently recognize each other as spiritual expatriates stuck in suburbia. So that's their bonding.
That could be. I mean, it's
issue.
a familiar nod. Like they sort of just nod at each other and make eyes. I don't think it's flirty. I don't think it's
No, it isn't flirty.
suggestive, but it is a familiar type of, I don't know. It's a very interesting glance.
I think that Helen knows about Dawn because of her experience. I think a lot of the women in this time, in this story, are naive, like you said, because they haven't experienced or they haven't admitted, there's not a lot of divorce. That's why Helen's thing is such a scandal.
Yeah.
So I think that because Helen's had this experience, when she sees Dawn, she's like, I know who you are. And Dawn knows that, and he looks at her and is like, he feels found out.
Caught.
Yeah, because here he is coming in late. And
Yeah, he's sort of deer in the headlights in that scene.
But yeah. I think a little bit, but I do think that they have just a tiny bit of bonding going on because she's kind of an outcast as well.
Okay.
With all the girls, because she brings it up in the conversation. I know y'all have been talking about me.
I gotcha.
So Betty, okay, so then we skip over, and I think other things happen in the show. And when we come back to Betty, she's cooking dinner and looks kind of all hassled and harried, and the phone rings, and it's Helen. And Helen's like, oh my gosh, could you possibly come over and babysit my kids for me? I'm out of time, and I want to go do this campaign, stuffing envelopes and stuff. So, and
Betty's like, now?
Betty's like, what, now? I mean, she's like looking at her spaghetti, and, it's like, well, I guess, let me see what Dawn thinks. She looks over at Dawn, and we don't really, I guess that's for another time. We don't really get any interaction from Dawn about whether or not he's going to watch the kids. She's just going to, she leaves them in the house by themselves anyway. She's just going to go over there and watch. Yeah. So look at Helen in this. Helen is a girl about town.
Yeah.
In her Beyonce hair rollers there, or Lady Gaga hair rollers, and she is really getting ready to go out.
Yes, she is.
And have some fun.
I'm all about some Helen.
I figured you liked Helen. I like Helen too. Helen's a modern, independent woman, as Megan would say.
Yeah.
That's what Megan tells me all the time. Mom, I'm a modern independent woman. I could do that myself. But that's that's kind of what Helen's trying to convey, except that she is asking for help at this point. I mean, she's just decided, well, I'm going to go ahead and reach out to Betty. We had kind of a moment there, and I'm going to let her watch the kids.
I gotcha.
So Helen's glad for Betty to come over, and so she does. Betty just tidies up and goes on over. And when she comes in, there's little Glenn, and he is playing... They title it Liebestrom. I think did I say it right, Nikki?
Yeah.
Okay. That's the name of the piano piece he's playing. And I looked it up, and it's Dreams of Love. That's the translation for the name of the piece. And so it kind of foreshadows Glenn's upcoming crush on Betty in this scene, this weird, strange, bizarre scene.
Yeah. Speaking of weird, bizarre crush, I think that's a good time to take our first break because we all need to just really contemplate
we
that
need to
for a second.
prepare yourselves.
Yes.
Yeah. Prepare yourselves for that. We'll be right back. All right, Laura, and we're back.
Okay,
What
and
else?
here we go.
What else you got there about Glenn? Good old Glenn.
Okay, so we might have said it before, but Glenn is in real life the creator's son,
Matthew Weiner's son.
So I think that's always interesting to point
too.
out.
Mm-hmm. And I'll also point out that viewers of Mad Men affectionately refer to Glenn as Creepy Glenn.
Oh yeah, this whole scene has a creep factor to it. It's sometimes sweet, but it's in a creepy way though.
He's so robotic. He's so dead-eyed. He doesn't have a ton of emotion. He's a very interesting young man.
Yes.
And so I think if you're watching along or if you've watched the series before, you'll understand the terminology of Creepy Glenn.
Yes, and the word that some of the reviews and stuff keep using that about him is that he's preternaturally calm.
What word did you say?
Preternaturally calm. Like that's that deadpan, weird kind of vibe. Yeah,
okay.
that you were just saying. I learned that word. I didn't know that word before I was reading about it. But let's see. Oh, and I don't want to skip the fact that when Betty comes in, she is really judgmental about the house.
Oh yeah,
it's a mess. Look, it's a mess, not in my standards, but by Betty's standards, it's a mess. There's ironing out. The ironing board's been left out. Helen's running around at the last minute, jerking the curlers out of her hair,
trying to find her shoes.
Yeah. And, last minute instructions to the kids before she bustles out the door.
Yeah, the last minute instruction to Glenn is no ironing because apparently she pays him to do the ironing for her.
And Betty's like, ironing?
Yeah.
So
Betty's kind of just right off the bat appalled, kind of at the house, which is what she's expecting,
but not outwardly so.
No,
I mean,
she's not. She's not.
She's
impolite.
always very polite in her.
We know Betty well enough to know that she's outwardly being polite, but we can see it written all over her face that she's just scanning everything in the house and just kind of like, what have I walked into?
Exactly. So, exactly. So So they end up on the couch. There they are on the couch and. Before we talk about the rest of the scene, that is my item. We try to cover a mid-century modern item, and each of us picks something out whenever we see it.
And for those listening in podcast land, why don't you describe what it is?
Okay, this is Helen's living room, and they're both sitting on the sofa, but above the sofa is this big, huge floral wall hanging, and it's made out of it's Sirocco. And it was super, super popular. They would do, and it was kind of nature themed. So they would do branches, dogwood branches, floral bush branches, trees, all butterflies, all birds, all different kinds of things like that. And it was really cheap. And I just thought that you guys might like to know. You always hear people say Sirocco, and it is the Syracuse Ornamental Company. So SY for Syracuse, SYR for Syracuse, O for ornamental, and then CO for company.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so it was, the material was molded wood pulp in the 50s. And then when they lasted through up to the 90s. But, later on it's more like molded plastic.
Yeah.
But the idea was to be affordable. And it was something that was always in the trading stamp books, so like when you got your green stamps and all that kind of stuff that you saved up to buy things, this Sirocco stuff was always in there. Those wall hangings were always in there.
Nanny always
I don't know what that means.
Nanny always saved up her stamps at the grocery store.
What stamps?
So when you go to the grocery store, say you get like 5 stamps per $10 that you spend.
It's like a loyalty program.
Oh, like a rewards a membership card.
Right. So you get like a stack of cards and you glue your stamps down when you get stamps at the grocery store. And when you save up enough, you could go get some dishes or go get a Sirocco wall hanging or something.
Yeah, we bought some recently. We'll have to show those in upcoming Flippin' and Sippin' because if I had remembered, I would have brought them with me. But yeah.
That was like my chore to do. After Nanny went to the grocery store, I would stick the stamps in the book.
Wasn't it fun?
Yeah, I liked it.
And then every once in a while you'd have a catalog and you could choose out of it, just like, other things that happened back then like that.
I love that.
But it was so funny. Yeah. So, okay. So anyway, that was our little item there. Those lamps are actually stunning as well, but
yes.
Yeah. But Helen's is a very different vibe at her house. All that's a little beneath Betty, the green stamp Sirocco wall hanging and that kind of stuff.
It's a little too modern for Betty. So.
Yeah, a little too modern and a little beneath her class level,
right. So we're in the mid-century, and let's all remember that the decor in mid-century, you were either mid-century modern, which is what many of us watching this channel enjoy, but there was also mid-century traditional, which is a very different vibe. Right. So Betty's very mid-century traditional.
And Helen's got money. We've pointed that out before, but it's that old money, new money kind of difference, Anyway, we won't get into that, but it is interesting. And then we end up in the we follow her to the bathroom. Glenn's watching TV on the sofa. Betty excuses herself to go to the ladies' room, and lo and behold, she gets in there poking around. She's like, she cannot contain herself. She's opening her drawers.
She loves to poke around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's checking out everything on the countertop. She opens a drawer.
I love this. I really love this peek into this drawer. It just cracks me up because, number one, I don't know if I should say my mom, but my mom used to hide cigarettes like that.
Joy's gonna die that you think that she has birth control pills
No,
and cigarettes in her.
No, but cigarettes, she used to hide cigarettes because she wouldn't let her mom know that she smoked, even as a married woman. She always hid her cigarettes. And there's birth control pills, so of course Betty picks those up like with disdain, so that you know that she knows that you know.
You know, I have to admit, when I've watched this in the past, I've always assumed that was a diaphragm in a case. But you think it's birth control?
Yeah, but it's okay. It's the same purpose.
Right.
It means the same thing. It means that, you know, you're needing protection and
Promiscuous.
you shouldn't be doing that. And then look at that, the little powder box up there. They still that is Cody.
Oh.
Powders, and they still look like that. Like if you can go to Walmart and buy that now, which is
that's
crazy.
Cool.
And we got an old set in from an auction the other day, and my mom said, I said the same thing to my mom, and she said, yeah, I have vivid memories of that. My teacher in school used her empty powder box like that for our gold stars. So we were so excited when she would get that out of her drawer that we knew we were getting a gold star. Yeah, so there's Howard Johnson and Travelodge matchbooks, you know, just all kinds of stuff that you would think that you would find in there, which is adorable.
It's very cute.
So yeah, Betty pokes through there with her little prim and proper self. And then we don't know what's going to happen, but we are shocked to see that she is going to pee here on...
Is that shocking to you?
I mean, you don't ever see that on TV.
That's true.
Betty's like
You
a
know?
Barbie, and you think she doesn't have anything going on down there. You know, she's blank.
And it's another one of that. It goes to the theme, you know, of seeing behind the exteriors. You know, you're seeing what's going on.
She hikes her skirt up and pulls down her pantyhose.
And it's an ordeal. And then all the time, you know, I think she can tell that somebody's outside the door, and then Glenn just
Glenn's
pops
like
on.
fumbling with the doorknob.
Glenn pops on in there,
Yeah, he does.
and I'm like, what is happening?
And
I
she's
mean,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, she tells him to get out, and he just stands there and stares at her.
Well, first of all, when he's fumbling with the doorknob, she says, "There's somebody in here. I'm in here." And then he just opens the door and just stands there and stares, like Nikki says. It's so weird. And
weird.
He says nothing, and she's like, "Get out!"
I can't wait to hear from Jamie Mid-Century Wasted and anybody that has young boys about that age. I can't wait to hear her, you know, her take on how she would react to that happening.
Yeah, so she just hoists herself up off the toilet when fumbles.
Waddles.
Yeah,
She waddles over there and pushes him out.
She's fully covered with all that
dress.
Yeah, all that dress
But
and
then
stuff.
she just proceeds to slam the door in his face, which is hilarious.
Yeah, crazy. And so yeah, she pushes him out, and he goes and he realizes that, you know, she's not happy with him, and he's crying and upset and everything. Also, when she comes back in, he's eating an apple. So what do you guys think about that?
So you don't see him bite into the apple, but it shows the apple very purposefully. So you get a look at the side of the couch, and by the side of the couch on the table, there's a apple with a bite taken out of it, and you get a look at that, and then it pans up to Glenn, who's visibly upset.
And it was totally on purpose. I mean, there's no way that it was accidental.
Yeah, and we talked about that because actually before that scene, you see him, when Betty goes to the bathroom, you see him sitting on the couch eating the apple. And you said to me, "Oh, there he is eating an apple. You know what that means?" And I'm like, well, it could just be he's eating an apple. It's his snack. I mean, sometimes an apple is just an apple. And then we see it again, though. And it's a shot that's not necessary for the action or for the story. It's just a secondary shot of that apple on the table with a bite out of it, and then it pans up, and I'm like, well, I guess this apple isn't just an apple.
An apple can be an apple, but an apple with a bite taken out of it is something entirely different. So for me, this imagery symbolizes that something is not altogether correct with this situation. It's a little bit sinful, quote unquote. It's a little bit perverse, quote unquote. It's not just right. Something is happening that is to make you feel uneasy. Something is happening to make you question what's happening. Even though it may not seem like anything is happening, it is.
And of course, temptation is always the thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it also symbolizes his loss of innocence.
Correct.
Because he has seen something now.
Yes.
He didn't really see anything, but it's enough. And now he's like not the little boy anymore.
But
yeah.
wait.
Yeah, but wait. But then, okay, so Betty consoles him. She's decided, Betty's really feeling herself in this episode. She's feeling like a superior mother figure to Helen.
Yeah.
And it shows her immaturity. She asks Glenn says she's pretty, and she says, and they talk about the age difference. How old is your mom?
Yeah.
He says, how old are you? And she's like, your mom's age. How old is your mom?
32.
32. And then
And she
Betty
goes,
goes, oh,
well,
I'm
I'm
28. Yeah. Which she's a young 28.
But they make up and they share
Yeah.
a hug together.
They do. And Glenn talks about her being pretty, looking like a fairy princess, another throwback to the fairy princess, the book and everything. And I think honestly, I do think Betty sees herself as a fairy princess. Like,
Sure.
she's troubled about her life, but just in other aspects, she sees herself as a fairy princess, or that's what she should be, is how she feels. So she's very flattered to be told that, because she's not told that.
Even by a little
everyday
boy.
life.
She's
Even by a little boy.
yeah, it does something for her ego.
And so when he says that she's so pretty, and they talk about her age and all that, she, now she's kind of off guard, because she's like, oh, he thinks I'm pretty. That's so nice. And then
he says the thing you don't expect.
yes, he says, could I have a piece of your hair? Could I have a lock of your hair?
Could I have a piece of your hair? And Betty's like, what?
She's like serial killer vibes.
Yeah, and she's like, no. And then he's like, just a piece. You won't miss it.
Yeah, you
And
won't miss
she's
it.
like, Glenn, no. So she turns him down a couple of times.
But
Then
then she jumps right up.
So she jumps right up. She walks over to the sewing kit area where the ironing board and stuff is. She takes the sewing scissors, reaches to the back of her hair and clips off a little strand, walks right over to Glenn, puts it in his hand. He's got his hands cupped out, and he just looks at it in his hands.
Creepy Glenn is like petting the hair in his hand.
Then she says, now off to bed with you. He goes to bed. She sits on the couch and smiles.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh, I did a great job. She's like patting herself on the back. She's like really thinks she's handled the situation perfectly.
Or know that she's just so flattered.
Yeah. So obviously we watch the episodes a couple of times before we do the podcast to make sure we don't miss anything, to take our notes and everything. So on our last walkthrough, on our last episode that we watched, I paused it and I looked over at Nikki and I said, why is that so creepy? And Nikki was like, well, because it's creepy. And I was like, no, I know it's creepy, but why? Why is it so creepy? She hasn't really done anything wrong, but she has. And I'm like, let's put our finger on why it's creepy, because we all feel it. We all feel that it's weird. And so I asked the question to Laura. I said, Laura, was it ever a thing in the past where a girl would give a boy a strand of her hair for like a romantic reason? Was that ever a thing? And Laura said, no, not really.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like you haven't seen that in a book somewhere or something, but it wasn't commonplace by any means.
So,
I mean, it wouldn't be something that Glenn would have seen a bunch or anything like that.
So obviously mothers might snip their baby's hair or put it in a baby book or something like that.
And then you had the opposite, so babies, but then also when people pass, people would take pieces of their hair and they would make mourning jewelry and things like that out of people's hair that had passed.
But let's put our fingers on why this is so creepy. So I don't think the act that Glenn wants the hair is necessarily the creepy part, because he's a kid. He doesn't know any better. He just knows that he's sort of infatuated with Betty. He thinks she's pretty, and that means something to him to have that. That's not the creepy part. The creepy part is that Betty does it. That Betty stands up, snips her hair, and gives it to him. But why?
But why? And I mean, we danced all around trying to verbalize the why, and we ended up trying to run through scenarios. We picked children in our families, and tried to imagine adults of the opposite gender giving them hair and how we would feel about that. And, we started with like female children and a female adult. And that didn't creep us out as bad. And then we thought about a female child and like a male adult. And that was creepy for some other reason because, what man would do that anyway? But then we thought about Mary Beth's little brother, Cameron, trying to think about when he was little and if some woman had done this. And I mean, it was an immediate different feeling. And it's because she is encouraging the infatuation. The little boy's obviously got a little crush. And the adult woman, should not encourage. And so that's what's creepy about it. She's like, she wants that attention. She wants the attention from the little boy.
I think Betty has a lot of issues. I think she's super, super immature. She's very lonely. Mm-hmm. And, he has a crush on her. She's flattered by that. So she's flattered by the attention. Super lonely. She doesn't want to alienate Glenn. Also, her mothering comes into effect. She wants to please him and have this end on a nice note and feel like that she has really mothered him and, quote, given him what he needs, which is what she tells somebody later in the episode.
Now, let me be clear. I don't want anybody to think that I think that Betty is being sexual in any sort of way. I don't. I think that Betty is being immature and doesn't understand how weird that is.
Yes, I agree. I think the implication here is that Betty's mind, as we'll find out later in the series, she's like stuck in a childlike state.
Absolutely.
And she doesn't see the problem with this because she thinks she is a child. Just a little girl and a little boy on the playground, and that's all this is.
Like a fairy princess.
I agree.
She thinks she's very pure, of intent and everything.
I agree, totally.
And then before we leave this scene, I think I skipped the part, but when they try to talk a little bit about the campaign, Helen's going to stuff envelopes for the Kennedy campaign. She's like, "Do you know Kennedy?" And she's like, "No, I really, She's like, "No, I really don't." She's like, "Well, I'll bring you some literature, And she said, "He is handsome, though, isn't he?" And Helen said that, and Betty says, "Yes, he's handsome, but we don't know who we're voting for yet."
We don't know who we're voting for.
So, I mean, the men made all those kind of decisions, and even though women could vote, you were expected to vote the way your husband voted.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, now we're going to skip to her coming home. So she comes home, and this is just a very short scene. Don doesn't interact. Don's fallen asleep, and he's fallen asleep working. He's trying to, you guys haven't covered what he's working on yet, which we'll will. Get to that. But he's just working on something, and she takes the opportunity to pick up his work to read, because I don't think that he would share that with Betty.
Probably not.
So I think that she finds this a nice little peek into what he's doing. She would never ask him, I don't think, to see his work.
Oh, I agree totally.
Yeah. So she's excited to pick that up and see what he's working on. Yeah. Okay. And then cut over to now things are happening in between, but like I said, we're following Betty this whole way. So here's her visit with the psychiatrist for the week.
Yeah, this is the last time we see Betty in the show.
Yeah, she looks exquisite. By the way, she's perfectly beautiful. She looks like a little Barbie doll laying there, and we can do fashion another time because I don't know enough about it, but look, that her dress, is just beautiful. She's all arranged there on that couch, her skirt's all fanned out and everything. I'm always amazed by that. She just has to look perfect at all times, even when she's doing this. But look, she's very worried in this clip that you've picked out there.
I think the clip that I've picked out is where she's saying something like, "I just feel for that little boy."
Yeah. Of course, yeah, that's really all the only thing that she talks about. She doesn't say anything about her weird interaction with Glenn. Like you would think, oh gosh, thank goodness I'm going to the psychiatrist this week because I've just given a kid a lock of my hair. We got a lot to talk about. But no, she doesn't do that. She wants to talk about Helen. But she's really giving insight into herself when she's talking about Helen. Of course. So she's like, poor Helen. She has this sad little job. I wrote down what all she says. Some sad little job, and then talks about her having frozen food in her house. Like
frozen food again.
I told you when she whipped out that Sara Lee cake that was like nothing to mess around with these girls about. You're not supposed to have frozen food around the house. And then she says, Helen puts on a brave face, but I think she's a little jealous of me, you know? And then she's like, I'm just concerned for the children. I'm just so concerned. You know, the baby will never know the difference, but that little boy, that poor little boy. And so she's trying to act like she feels so motherly towards this little boy. And she says, the person taking care of him just isn't giving him what he needs. Well, that is, I mean, it's telling in 50 different directions. Like it could, you know, it could mean Betty's not getting what she needs from Don.
Right.
What is Don getting from Betty? Not exactly what he needs, or he wouldn't be, you know, out and about. You know, the kids. Betty's ironically cold with her own kids. Like she's not.
Yeah.
She really doesn't share those warm moments like that. That little nighttime reading scene is kind of rare. She's rarely ever that warm with them. She's pretty cold.
And that gets worse and worse as the series goes on.
So it's ironic that she feels so motherly towards Glenn in this episode because she doesn't feel that way towards her own kids a lot of the time. And then I also think it's cool. I mean, she just acts really smug and really kind of phony and fake when she's talking to the psychiatrist about Helen. Well, you know, because she's really, you know.
Some of it could be that she feels like she doesn't have a mother. And so she's looking at Glenn and she feels like he doesn't have an adequate mother. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like she's seeing maybe some of herself in him as well.
Yeah, she thinks that he's poorly mothered for sure. And she thinks that she could do a much better job, I guess, lock of hair and all.
Okay.
But I also thought it was interesting. I read this, so this is not my own thought, but that whole scene is always shot from above. So it's supposed to create the feeling of Betty looking down on Betty. Betty's is kind of self-analyzing herself as she talks to this doctor who doesn't ever say anything.
I got you.
Yeah, and rambles on about poor Helen.
All right. Good job, Laura.
Yeah.
That was well done.
Okay, thanks.
I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
All right, let's take our second break, and then we will be right back to talk about Pete and Dawn. Okay, so Pete and Dawn are next.
Yes, that's our area.
Yes, so I'm going to say that this whole episode really is about Pete, and everything else that goes on in the episode is sort of background or accompaniment, so to speak. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the whole episode, the very first scene of the episode is a pan through the office, and then it shows close in on Pete's closed door. So remember this, it's a closed door, and it sort of is just a slow pan into that door. So I want you to remember that that's how the episode opens. That's the first scene that you see. So then we get a peek inside the office, and we see that the boys are in there. Harry's in there, Paul's in there, Pete, and they're listening to a record. It's Bob Newhart. And they're just all cracking up. It's like it's the funniest thing they've ever heard.
Here's my fun fact for you for today. I'm sorry. You have to hear this, though, because you guys are going to be impressed.
I love fun facts.
Okay. So we all know who Bob Newhart is. I don't know. You guys are...
I know.
I know.
All right.
I had Nick at Night.
But his... yeah. But we always think about the Bob Newhart show. But when he first started out, he was, just like a stand-up comedian. But he started out in life as an ad copywriter, just like those guys. And that's why they think it's so hilariously funny, because his whole shtick on this album is he's talking to his friend at work about all the things that these guys go through, all the clients, all the jokes, all the ad writing, all that kind of stuff. I thought that was so funny.
Yeah. I didn't think I knew that.
No, I didn't know that either, and that explains a lot. Like, why on earth are they just hanging around listening to Bob Newhart on a record? I had no idea.
Great fact.
Yeah, thanks.
Good one. I love it. So then we see Pete's secretary pop her head in, and she's like, Mr. Campbell, your wife's here. And he's like, what? Like, he's like, excuse me? If you're looking at the screen, he's got like this look on his face like, I didn't authorize this. So he goes to the door. Everybody, comes out into the foyer area there, and he's like, hello, lovely. I like that he calls her lovely.
Yeah,
he calls her that through the whole thing. I think that's really cute and endearing. Mm-hmm. So she's like, I'm sorry. I thought you'd be happy to see me. And he's like, well, you're not on my book. He's not exactly happy to see her. he feels a little bit not threatened, but just
Like ambushed.
yeah, like you should have called first. You should have asked me first.
Yeah.
So and she's like, I want to take you out. I have something that I want to show you. So they're just all kind of talking. The boys, they're talking to Trudy, and Dawn and Peggy walk up. And this is very interesting as well. So Peggy is in this episode for all of a few seconds.
Yeah.
And has 0 lines.
They paid for Elizabeth Moss to come onto this episode and just stand there like that for like 2 seconds, and that was it.
It was super important, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she comes up. It's the first time that she's ever seen Trudy in person. She looks a little sheepish. She looks a little, I don't know, intimidated maybe. And then she sort of just gives these cutesy eyes and this little cutesy wave and walks away.
Yeah.
That's it. It was just an acknowledgement of hi and walks away. That was it. So it was a awkward interaction.
You know, meeting the wife of the man that you've slept with.
Yeah.
She didn't really meet her. Nobody introduced anybody.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
I kept thinking Dawn was going to or something.
No. Nobody mentioned her.
Nobody ever did.
So Dawn is saying things to Trudy like, you know, whatever, nice to meet you, but he's also saying some really underhanded things.
Yeah, he takes this opportunity to insult Pete in front of his wife, and he does this throughout this episode. The whole portion of this episode about Pete is also about Pete and Dawn and their relationship, and Dawn's always insulting Pete. And in this one, he says they were talking about how Trudy was talking about how happy she is to be married to Pete, and Dawn says, we're almost as happy as you are to have him. And she said, oh, I don't think that's possible. And he said, well, maybe you're right.
So he keeps saying things like that.
Yeah.
So he's insulting Pete, but Trudy doesn't catch on.
No.
Trudy thinks that he's being really handsome.
Well, but he is to her. I mean, he's only just hinting around at the insult part. He really is trying to be polite.
He is trying to be
Yeah.
polite to Trudy, but he's doing that to Pete on purpose. He's trying to get under Pete's skin, and he's doing it. It's working. So let's see. So then we cut to go ahead.
I was just gonna say Trudy is smitten with him in that scene.
Oh yeah,
with Dawn.
She thinks he's so charming.
Yeah, I know the implication when she says he's not at all what I imagined is that Pete's bad mouthing him, but which he probably is. But also, she's like, "Damn, you didn't tell me he's that good looking, Pete."
Yep.
Yeah, she was swooning over Dawn.
So then we cut to the next scene where Trudy has taken Pete to an apartment to show him this apartment that she's found that she wants them to buy. And Pete is really sulky about it. He's a little bit emasculated again. So I think in this whole episode, Pete feels punched down to size. He feels kicked. He feels less than. And he feels the opposite of manly. You know, he feels like he's not wearing the pants in almost every scene in this show. And so in this episode, excuse me. And this is one of them. So first of all, Trudy has gone on her own and found this apartment without his help, which I think is probably very forward of the time. We find out that it's a 1,500 square foot apartment and it's listed for $32,000, which isn't that fabulous.
Yeah.
I would love to find a $32,000 apartment. And then Pete goes on to say, honey, we can't afford this. I only make $75 a week. That's only $3,500 a year. We can't afford this. And so she's like, well, why don't you just ask, we're just a young couple who needs help. And so she's hinting for him to ask his family because he comes from a wealthy family, which we're going to find more about.
And she does too.
But he comes from an affluent family. And so we're going to find out more about that later. But he's just very reluctant.
He insults Trudy when she says that. He's like, he said, I know you're not that good at math, but that's, $3,500 a year.
And actually, she is pretty good. I mean,
yeah, she doesn't say anything back to him about that. She's like,
she's very smart. She, very intelligent as you see throughout this entire episode. So then we cut to, I'm going to let you do this one.
Oh, okay.
It's where Dawn meets...
Dawn meets Rachel. Rachel's come into the office. And you know, at the last time that they were together in the previous episode, they had that kiss and they decided that nothing more could come of it. And she had said something to him like, she didn't want him on her business anymore. She was going to keep her business there at Sterling Cooper, but she didn't want to see Dawn in the office. Well, here he is. I don't know if he ambushed her on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
I guess he probably did, yes. And she's surprised to see him. And they have just like a small talk, brief conversation. And Dawn is saying things like, I wish this was different between us. And maybe we should go to lunch sometime at least. And she shuts him down and she's like, I don't see what the point would be of that. And then she just leaves.
For what?
Yeah.
She just walks away.
Yeah.
You kind of have to agree with her. Like, why would you want to go to lunch?
Yeah. The women are kind of wearing the pants in this episode.
Yeah.
I'm kind of here for it. All right. So next scene that we see, Pete has gone to his family's house and he's just sitting there having a drink. His mom is sort of up, hustling and bustling. They're leaving for their summer house. And the couch is all covered like they're getting ready to leave. She's wearing a Christmas sweater, but they're going on summer vacation. So
Well, she says that everything's already packed into the trunks and that was the only sweater she had available.
so that's hilarious. It's just some really funny things. The dad is sitting there in shorts and a sports jacket. I mean, they just look like the most pompous people ever, just sitting there drinking scotch or whatever.
Yeah, that's what he was doing.
And then the topic comes up about Pete's work. And the dad's like, I still don't understand what you do. I've heard that before.
Oh, yeah.
As a graphic designer, my dad has said in the past, I don't understand what you do. So there's nothing worse than having a parent or somebody that you care about being like, I don't know what you do. You know, because the dad, he doesn't care to know. He knows it's not something substantial like a doctor or a lawyer.
I just started to say, yeah, it's like, it's the equivalent of what a used car salesman is in jokes and things like that. It was the ad men. They weren't, it was sleazy.
Yeah. And he says, you know, all you do is dine and whore your clients. That's all you do. Dining and whoring. And so this is another scene where Pete's just knocked down to size. He's emasculated again. And it's just
probably the main one. You know, that's his dad.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, they make it clear in this scene because, well, I might be jumping the gun just a little bit, but just a little bit later on, Pete says something like, well, you did this for Bud. You did X, Y, and Z for Bud, which is his brother. And apparently you get the impression that Pete is the black sheep and that they give more money and more attention to Bud and that they don't approve of Pete and his lifestyle. In fact, Mary Beth, what do they say about Pete's job?
Well, they say it's no job for a white man.
Yikes.
Yeah,
whatever that means, but yikes.
Yeah, so you can automatically see what sort of family this is. And then, you know, Pete starts to bring up the apartment later in the conversation. He goes, well, Trudy's found an apartment she likes, but we're going to need help. We're going to need help with the down payment. And the mom's like, oh, where is it? And they mention the address, and the dad's like, well, it falls off after whatever street, meaning it's a bad part of town. It's not as nice as, you know, where you should be living. So they're
so snobby. They're so old school.
Yeah. And it's just obvious that Pete's very uncomfortable with his family. It's not a welcoming, warm family. It's very stuffy and it's very rigid. So, and the dad's like, I don't think so. I don't think it's a good idea. And so Pete, just in a huff, he gets up and leaves, and he's like, well, whatever.
I like the final Pete's final blow here. His mom sets the coaster down, and he's drinking with his dad, and he like slams his drink down, not on the coaster.
Yeah, that's funny.
It's like, way to stand up for yourself, Pete.
And when there is a time where Pete says, you know, you don't give me anything, like Nikki was saying, you know, talking about Bud, the brother, and the dad says, we gave you your name. and what have you done with it? So he is not proud of Pete as a son, and it's just really...
And the name is about to come into play, very specifically.
Yes. So then we cut to the bedroom, and I think this is a really interesting scene. So if you're looking at it, Pete is unbuttoning his shirt, but it looks so oversized here. I know that part of it is because his cuffs are undone. He's taken his cufflinks off, so the cuffs are undone, but the shirt just looks like it swallows him, and he looks like a little boy here being consoled by Trudy. And this is another thing. I think he feels like a little boy, just punched down to size. He feels like he's been kicked in the gut again. And I think that oversized look is purposeful to make him look smaller.
Yeah.
And he's ashamed, though, to tell Trudy that he can't get the money from his father. So he says, it didn't come up. My dad's been having some health problems. It didn't come up. So he's embarrassed.
I think I'll just go ahead and throw out the name that I would name the episode. Have we said the name of this episode is New Amsterdam?
I mentioned it at the very beginning.
So, but anyway, my rename for it is These Kids These Days. Because, Pete's, they really focus in on Pete being a kid. They show his parents, they show Trudy's parents, and how different their values are. That big generation gap is starting to really unfold, with the World War II generation, and then the modern generation that's going to go into the 60s with the hippies and all that kind of stuff. So all that's really getting ready, being highlighted. And then plus Glenn, with all his shenanigans.
Yeah.
So that's my name of the episode.
Okay. Kids these days?
Yeah.
All right. So in our next scene, it's a client meeting with Bethlehem Steel. So do you want to take this one, since it's
Sure.
a lot about Dawn?
Yeah, sure. So the client for this episode is Bethlehem Steel, and they've come in to hear Dawn's pitch, and we get the impression that they've been in before, and they kind of gave Dawn guidelines about what they were looking for, and Dawn thinks he's got a home run here. The idea was that steel is indispensable, and it's a commodity, and that that basically it's built the country. So he shows these series of what look like advertisements for cities: New York, Chicago, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, and they say, like, New York, brought to you by Bethlehem Steel, and Chicago, brought to you by Bethlehem Steel. And so it's really cool. I liked it, and I liked Sal's art there, but the client doesn't like it, and so the client says something like, this looks like an ad for a city, and I don't like cities. And anyway, so
Pete just sort of interjects, though, and Pete is he sort of is saying, well, I'm sure that Dawn, that they can come up with something else, and Dawn's like, you can see him, he's like gritting his teeth. He doesn't want to give up that easy.
Well, and he doesn't like that Pete is asserting himself in this meeting, because there's a hierarchy in the company, and Pete is a junior executive, first of all, and second of all, he is not as an account man, he's not supposed to get involved with creative.
Right.
So he's really overstepping his line here. And also, I forgot to mention, there was one more example of Dawn telling a joke at Pete's expense. Like right when they walk in the room, they were talking about how the client had gone golfing with Pete. And the client says, I never have much luck golfing unless I'm playing against Campbell. And Dawn said, he's known for losing gracefully.
Another kick in the ribs.
Yeah, just like a little slight, an underhanded like slap there.
Yep.
And Pete notices it, and so anyway, they're just always sneering like at each other throughout the episode.
So Pete interjects several times within the meeting and is saying, Walter, if you don't like what's happening, they can put something else together. And so begrudgingly, Dawn agrees to do that, and so they agree to set a meeting the next day, and that Walter's going to stay in town. Pete says, I'll get you another night at the hotel. We can go see a musical. Bye bye, Birdie. Birdie again. So birds were mentioned in that fairy tale earlier, and that is again Betty's nickname from Dawn. So that's in there. Bye Bye Birdie will come into play in later episodes.
He's like, I don't like birds.
I don't like birds either.
He doesn't like cities or birds. He doesn't like anything.
So the client leaves and Dawn's like, Sal can walk out the client. Mm-hmm. And so Sal walks out the client and Dawn shuts the door and he's like, basically, you need to do your job. You need to let me do my job. This guy was sentences away.
Yeah.
I could feel it.
And Pete's like, well, I could feel it the other way.
Yeah.
You know, he was sentences away from leaving.
Yeah. And so Pete goes on to say, I have ideas. Mm-hmm. I could do this. Because at the beginning, you get the idea that Pete wants Dawn's job. That he's sort of gunning after Dawn's job.
Well,
In the very, very first couple of episodes.
I suppose that's, yes, that is true. Yeah. And there's a power conflict between Dawn and Pete all the time. And I'm going to propose in this episode, it kind of goes just a little bit in a different direction specifically for this episode because as I think Laura would talk about and Mary Beth, I think we all agree that it's about family and about the generations and about Pete trying to find his place and like his own identity in light of this big family name that he has that we haven't told you about yet. And trying to get out from under his father. And I think he sees Dawn as being a father figure, somebody who could replace his negative father and who could give him the encouragement and the reassurance and the praise. So he's always trying to suck up to Dawn. Mm-hmm. It's possible that it's just because he wants Dawn's job, but he wants Dawn's approval. And I think it's because, you know, he seeks that because he doesn't get it from his dad. His dad doesn't like his job.
Yeah. And I think this episode also acts as audience service to us, you know, letting us know how things really go. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not Pete's place to be doing this, to be questioning creative. It's Pete's job to make the client happy, to prepare the client for the meeting, and
to make them like the idea.
Yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, Pete does go on to say, I have ideas. I used to keep a whole notebook full of ideas. And he says,
This is hilarious.
He says, and then I come to this place and you all tell me I'm good with people. And I've never heard that before. So
I think that's when he says, isn't that when Pete says that he came up with the idea independently or whatever?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for direct
marketing.
For direct marketing, yeah.
Turns out it already existed, but I came to it independently.
Yeah.
So he's a real piece of work, but we love Pete around here.
Yeah.
All right, so then we're running out of time. We've been talking too long, but it's okay. So then we cut to dinner with Trudy's parents. So this dinner goes a lot differently than the meeting we had with Pete's parents. So they are really interested in what is going on with their daughter and their son-in-law. I like that we see Pete from the back here, which tells me that he's the main character of this episode. You know, oftentimes we see Dawn from the back, but this time we see Pete from the back. The dad even goes so far as to say something about his job and something like, you must have a lot to do all day, something to that effect, which is the opposite of what his dad said.
Yeah, they're delightful.
Oh, yeah.
Trudy's parents are just like, you know,
Yes.
super friendly and jovial and yeah.
So then Trudy proceeds to tell them about the apartment. The dad's really interested. The mom wants to know more. He insinuates that he'll help with the down payment. Pete is very reluctant. He's not insulted necessarily, but he's sort of embarrassed, sort of ashamed because he feels like he should be able to provide for his wife. Mm-hmm. And the dad's like, I'm not going to hear anything about it. You know, it's all good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm investing in you and my little jelly bean.
Oh, my little jelly bean. So then we go to the cab ride home. Visually, Pete is not happy. I mean, if you just got the news that you were going to get help with a down payment on a house, you would think that you would be extremely elated. But he's not, because he feels, again, punched down to size. He doesn't feel like he's man enough in this episode. Trudy is beside herself. She's thrilled because she wants the apartment. And he makes the comment that it's different, that it came from her side rather than his side. And she's like, it's our money, you know, but it shouldn't matter where it comes from. And he's like, but it does to me.
Oh, and especially in that day and age, it really mattered.
And then it goes on. I think this is an interesting side note as well. She perks up and she says to the cab driver, she's like, I want you to make a turn up here. And he's like, I've got to go downtown and meet somebody for drinks. She's like, it'll only take a second. She's calling the shots here. Mm-hmm. She's calling the shots. She's called the shots on finding the apartment, funding the apartment, the cab ride home. And he's just not thrilled. And then she makes a comment about the armory when at the end of this scene. And then she says, the armory, when are they going to tear that dinosaur down? So if you don't know, the armory is an historic landmark in New York. And I think it's just an out with the old, in with the new type of reference. This is a new age of dealing with things. So, you know, maybe the man doesn't always have to provide for the woman. Maybe things can be different. So just a thought there. So I'm going to go ahead and take another break, and we will be right back in just a second. All right. So back to whining and dining and whoring and all the good stuff.
Yeah.
Pete is having drinks with the client. We see the client there, and Pete brings in a couple of gals, and
his cousins.
He introduces them as his cousins, which we probably know better. But and the client's like, I thought your cousin was a redhead, and he's like, no, that's my other cousin. She wasn't available tonight. So that's funny. But they're all having a big time drinking, and then Pete does the thing that Pete is not supposed to do. Pete pitches copy. So Pete says to the client, he's like, you know, I've been thinking about your account. What do you think of Bethlehem steel, the backbone of America? And so the client is quick to shut Pete down. He's like, get off the clock, Campbell. We're having a good time. I'm here with these girls. So he shuts Pete down. So Pete thinks that that's over, that didn't work after all. And so they go on and proceed to have a big time. He's put in his place again, this time by the client. So then we go to the next day. They're in the follow-up meeting with Bethlehem Steel, and Don starts to pitch his idea. Earlier we talked about Betty. She was going to bed and saw the little notebook that Don had been doodling in. So he had been working on the follow-up ad for Bethlehem Steel, and he starts to pitch that one.
Yeah, and his idea is, oh, little town of Bethlehem. So that's his play on it, and it's the same idea basically. It's a city, or you know, the name of a city and cityscape, and then it says, oh, little town of Bethlehem underneath, and it's a great idea. And then the client says, I don't know if he says he likes it or not, but he says, stop trying to pitch this so hard. I know this isn't really the idea that you want me to take. So,
and Pete perks up. He's like,
yeah. And Don's confused. He's like, well, what are you talking about? And he's like, oh, you know, you had your boy Campbell over here pitch this to me last night at the bar, and I love it. The Bethlehem Steel, the backbone of America.
Don's like, oh yeah, that one.
And he's like shooting daggers out of his eyes.
And Pete's in the background like,
yeah. Yeah, so they come to an agreement. They're like, yeah, that's great, we'll do that. And then the client leaves, and so now we're having another tense moment after the meeting with Dawn and Pete. And Pete is feeling high and mighty, and he just has to push just a little harder, like rub Dawn's nose in it.
I told you I had ideas.
Yeah, and he says, you know what? I think that you're mad because I did something good. And no, he's like, it's not because why Don's mad. He's just saying, you know what? I did something good here, and you're getting the compliment for it.
And then Don proceeds to say, you know what, Pete? Why don't you go get a cardboard box, put your things in it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so Pete automatically just looks like, what have I just stepped in? He's like, what have I done?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
He's like, I've really done it now. I pushed just a little too hard. Anyway, so he goes back to his office. Pete goes back to his office and proceeds to have some kind of a meltdown.
Yep.
Where he, starts pouring a drink and starts just literally crying tears and blubbering, like on his couch.
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, it's really sad. But first, before he starts blubbering, there is a quick cut scene where Dawn like busts into Roger's office.
Yeah, he's in a rage, and he is determined that this is Pete's last day. So he goes into Roger's office, and he's like, "Do you remember Pete Campbell's last day? Because it's today." And
so he goes,
Roger's like, "Whoa, what happened?" And Pete tells him, and Roger's like, "That son of a bitch." And so they're both on board that Pete has to go. Yep. So then the next scene.
So hold on. So then we show a quick cut to Pete in his office, who has poured a drink. He's crying. He looks
like a little boy.
Again,
he's a little boy.
A little boy who's just had his sandwich stolen.
He got a little swat on the tail.
These kids these days.
Kids these days.
Yeah. So speaking of kids these days, that's a great segue, because what I want to talk about here in the next scene, Roger and Dawn go to see Bert Cooper, who is the big daddy, the big granddaddy of the whole company. And if you didn't already realize that, they tell it to you. The first thing that happens when they walk in is that Roger goes and looks at a picture, a framed picture on the desk, and it's a picture of Roger as a very small child sitting on Bert's knee. And so we finally realize kind of the relationship there is that they've known each other since, all Roger's life, and that Bert is like a surrogate father for Roger.
Yeah.
And so very literally, Roger is going to talk to his dad now. So we have the whole issue of fathers and generations and power struggles and all of that.
Right.
So, Roger walks in kind of like Pete, all high and mighty, and he's going to tell Bert the way it's got to be. He's this is Pete's last day. This is what he did. And and I know there are rules in this business, and that Pete's broken the rules and he's got to go. And feels very confident in that. But Bert blindsides him and is like, you know what? There are other rules. And the other rules are that we can't get rid of somebody like Pete Campbell. And here we start to learn a little bit more about things like the load that Pete's carrying of his family name, and also the title of the episode being New Amsterdam. Turns out that Pete is a dykeman on his mother's side, which basically means that he's an original owner of Manhattan Island, basically. Before the English did, and when the Dutch owned it, like we're talking like 1600s, but his family goes back to that time, and that they owned a lot of Manhattan for a long time. So anyway, forget where I was going with that, but so Bert says, we can't get rid of Pete. We need his family. We need his name. And Dawn pushes against all this. Dawn's like, well, that doesn't matter.
He's more important than I am.
Yeah, Dawn's like, doesn't want to live by those rules. He wants things to be more progressive. But Roger betrays Dawn here. He thought they were on the same side, but Roger realizes he can't go against Bert, and he's like, okay, well, I guess that's the way it has to be, and that's what we'll do. But
the reason being is, if we get rid of Pete, we lose our in, quote unquote, with this club and that club and this place. And
he's like, I can't have Mrs. Dykeman walking around talking about how poorly we've treated her son,
Yeah.
I mean, I know that's not her married name, but that's who he meant. Like,
right.
Can't have Pete's mom walking around telling people down at the club that, we've run over her son and treated him so poorly.
So I also want to point out in this scene, this is my item that I've picked out for the scene. So here on Bert's coffee table is a Viking glass ashtray. This is a sphere / orb ashtray, very heavy, slanted so that the circle is not on top. It's sort of at a 45. So I think this is really awesome. We have not had one of these that we've sold, but we've had similar items. We've had similar Viking glass, but this is my show for the episode. I love this.
Cool.
I love that stuff. Okay, so then
Bert was just so funny in that scene. Can't be overstated how funny he is, because he really happily put them in their place. Like, it was like a weird, it was like you knew he was totally in charge, but he did it like really
in like a father figure kind of way.
Yeah, really funny and jovial, and he like whistled a
he's-
song on their way out.
So after he tells them all that, you can see if you're watching on YouTube, he has this big smile on his face. He's like, well, there we go. I'm glad that all worked out.
Everything's all better now.
Yep. And proceeds to put his feet up on the desk and whistle while they leave.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's Bert's job of putting them in their place as well. Mm-hmm. So then we're going back to Pete's office. Pete has now slumped down onto his couch, drink in hand, drinks on the floor. His feet are propped up on the couch, and he's just so sulky. And Roger and Dawn just burst in there, and Roger gets sort of all up in his face. And he goes, I want to make this clear. You really royally screwed up. Yeah. You were fired.
Yeah.
I wanted you out. And then he goes on to say, Bert wanted you out. Mm-hmm. So he's making it sound like, everybody wanted you out. And then he points over to Dawn. This man fought for you. And so Dawn in the background just has like this shocked look on his face, like, oh.
He's like, I did.
What's happening? So Roger's going to bat here for Dawn. He's making it seem like Dawn bailed him out. Mm-hmm. Like Dawn was the big hero here. You would be nothing at this company if it wasn't for Don Draper. And Pete is just like shaking his head. He's like, I understand. Yeah. Okay.
He's like, I won't let you down, Dawn.
Yeah, that's my favorite. So that's my quote for the episode. When they're leaving, he goes, I won't let you down, Dawn. And Roger's like, Jesus, Campbell, don't ever say that. So I love it. And then he also says, in that episode, or in that scene, he goes, the only reason you're still here is because of Don Draper's largesse. And so that's what I would rename the episode if I were renaming the episode, Don Draper's largesse.
Yeah, I think that's a great title.
So they leave the office, and Pete is just like 100 pounds lighter. Uh-huh. And so he's like, whew.
I love Roger.
Yeah. Dodged a bullet there. Right. I guess I'm going to be able to keep my job and afford this a new apartment. Mm-hmm. So speaking of apartment, there is a scene that I missed here, Nikki. I'll let you do this one if you want.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say it a while back. Sal's just particularly funny in this episode. He's the comic relief, and it's really brilliant. The writing, they just write these little bitty tiny things in for characters like Sal, and he says he picked a fine time to buy an apartment.
He's like, didn't you just buy an apartment? Well, anyway, the last scene with Dawn is Dawn and Roger, and this just hits home the theme here of fathers and generations. And so Dawn is really frustrated, and he's really pissed about how this went down. He's poured himself a drink in disgust. And Roger's like, you should enjoy that drink. Your generation doesn't know how to drink. My generation knows how to drink because we're men, and we drink because it's good, and you drink because you've got some wound that you're trying to lick all the time. And Dawn says something snooty back like, yeah, you're such a man, you're such a strong guy, you couldn't even stand up to Bert. I mean, he didn't say that exactly, but he was implying that he is disappointed in Roger's manhood, that he thinks that Roger is a sham.
Roger's like, excuse me.
Yeah, what was it that Dawn said?
It's pretty much that.
Yeah, he said, go ahead.
Yeah, he said something very pointed to Roger about what happened with Bert. And Roger says, pardon?
Yeah.
And so he's pointing out that
he was powerless. He's like, well, maybe it's because I, can't live with being powerless around here.
Yeah. Dawn can't live with being powerless.
Pardon.
Yeah. So they go back and forth about, who's really in charge, who really has the power, and that Dawn is just not gonna lay down and be walked over. And I guess maybe it's key to his generation which really his generation, I think Pete's generation is really the generation of the 60s here, being the younger guy. He's coming into his own. at the very beginning of the 60s. I feel like Dawn and Roger are more contemporary to each other as far as generations go, a little bit. But anyway, yeah, Dawn implies that things are different now, or they should be, and that he's an example of that. He's not going to just take these old rules and just roll over.
Yeah, I got you. Very nice. So then we go to the last scene of the show, and we go back to the apartment that Trudy wanted, and they are closing on that apartment. So they've gotten it with the help of her parents. The parents are there. She's there. The realtor's there. Pete's there. And a neighbor comes in, and she's like, "Oh my God, we're gonna have a Dykeman in the building." You know, she's so excited.
They've already talked all about it.
And you know, Pete is just so sheepish because, you know, he is of a wealthy family, but it's not like he's super proud of it. He doesn't feel a part of it. He doesn't feel connected to it really. And Trudy is there talking to the new neighbor, and she says, "Oh, honey, why don't you tell the story of whatever?" And he's like, "Why don't you tell it? You tell it a lot better than I do." And he walks over into the corner by himself, looks over at his family and the new neighbor. They're all just elated, and he's just got his head down. So he just looks so sad, so deflated at the end of the episode. You know, just the whole episode long, he has just been punched down, emasculated, and he does have his job back, which is great, but he just doesn't feel like a man.
Yeah, well, because he's known, he's only as good as his family name. That's all anybody wants to talk about is his ancestors. That's what the neighbor wanted to talk about, was such and such ancestor who knew the Roosevelts and who farmed with the Roosevelts or whatever. And instead of talking about Pete, you know, if Pete were a real man, he'd have accomplishments that his wife would want to talk about.
Yep.
But they want to talk about the people in his past who he could never live up to, or at least he's trying, but he's failing. And,
right.
You know, so he's just...
He's not there on his own merits.
Yeah.
Right.
And he just is really sad about that.
Yeah. So if you remember, the way the episode began, it was on a closed door that said Peter Campbell, his office door. That's how the episode began. A slow pan in to that door, and it ends with a slow pan in over his shoulder as he's looking out at the city.
And his darn $10 million view there.
Yeah, really. So from the back, of course, insinuating he's the main character, in my opinion, it pans over his shoulder into the city. So what do you guys think about the closed door beginning and the open window ending? To me,
it's interesting.
To me, it means he has gone over some hurdles in this episode. They may not have gone the way that he wanted them to go, but he has achieved some things in this episode. He's learned some things. He's gotten this nice apartment, and now he's got a whole world of possibilities in his future.
Yeah, he's got the city at his feet, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think the last scene there is easier to figure out than that closed door. I don't really know exactly where that's going, but I think you're right. He's looking out into his future.
They're playing "I'll Take Manhattan." You know, that's the song, the Ella Fitzgerald song. But I mean, "I'll take Manhattan." You know, they're talking about conquering the city. You know.
Yeah.
What do you all think about the closed door?
Yeah, let us know in the comments down below. So if you're listening again in podcast land, we would love for you to come over to YouTube, leave us a comment, subscribe to our channel if you're having a great time. We are resellers of vintage collectibles, so we do videos where we do shop-alongs, shop for vintage collectibles, and then we resell them on eBay and on YouTube. We have a Friday night show called Flippin' and Sippin', where we celebrate the weekend, sell some of our items, have some fun, play some games, and it's a really good time. We would love for you to come over and join us there as well.
We have a love of all things mid-century, even madmen.
That's right. All right, guys. Thanks so much for joining. We are really appreciative of your being here, and as always, make sure you stay tuned to see what Fatbird finds next. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.